Um, yeah. So morning, everyone. Hope you all are doing well. I'm your host Shivam Sareen. I manage open innovation initiatives at NASSCOM. Today we have with us Mr. Nilesh Shah. He's the group president and MD of Kotak Mahindra Asset Management Company. Nilesh is also the chairman of Association of Mutual Funds in India. Today's session will be on scaling up from startup, learnings from the public market. Nilesh would be talking about startup strategies to get a better valuation, what investors from the public market look at when investing in a scale up, governance and financial readiness for startups to be listed. And I'm sure he'll have a lot of success stories and anecdotes that he can share with us. Before I hand over to Nilesh, I would request all the attendees to keep sharing your questions. And at the end, Nilesh would be answering all your queries, all your questions as well. So over to you, Nilesh. You can begin the session.
Thank you, NASSCOM, for giving me an opportunity to speak to entrepreneurs. A lot of exciting things are happening in the startup world. A lot of innovations are getting funded. Availability of capital is no longer a constraint for deserving entrepreneurs. This wasn't the case in India even a few years ago. And what startup world has achieved is truly fascinating. Now, clearly in today's startup world, capital is coming from private equity investors, family offices, and mainly global investors. Local investors are ramping up their investment in startup world, but majority contribution still come from global investors. Over the years, many startups have grown into bigger companies, some even unicorns. All these companies will require exit. It could be strategic sale, or it could be IPO like Zomato has recently shown. There were doubts in the minds of investors earlier whether Indian capital market has appetite for companies like building their business and who in their offer document doesn't mind sharing the risk factor that for the foreseeable future, they will still be loss making. The resounding success of Zomato on the Indian bourses does put to rest that question. Indian investors have the appetite to fund startup investment, to fund growth capital, and they are willing to patiently wait for that investment. My feeling is that post Zomato and Nykaa and Paytm and other startups which are getting listed in India, public market exit will become an important part for any entrepreneur, for any startup. Your options will continue to remain open on strategic acquisition, stroke merger. It will also remain open on global listing, but there will be opportunity to get listed in India, in Indian public market. Now, compared to private market, public market is different. At the end of the day, investors wants to make money in both the market. So the objective remains the same. However, as there are many paths to reach nirvana, same way, there are many paths to achieve the same objective of making money on investments. And this is where public market differs a little bit from private market. I thought I will bore you with a big solid presentation on what public market wants. But then I said that will not cut ice with you. When I was young, I had gone to one old investor saying that please give me some knowledge. And he said, Beta, you will not remember what I say if I give you a sermon, but you will remember stories. So let me tell you one story. That story narration kind of stayed with me over the years, and which is where I'm just going to share some stories with you. These are the stories of success and failure in capital market. And hopefully all of you will be able to pick up what is necessary to succeed in Indian capital market and what will be not succeed, what will not so succeed in Indian capital market. So let me begin with story number one. You know Tata Motors, they are India's largest commercial vehicle manufacturer. They are one of the world's largest commercial vehicle manufacturer. One day they had sold a truck in their showroom. The purchaser took the truck and moved out. It traveled a little distance and then stopped. The purchaser was very angry. He bought a Tata Motor truck and it didn't, took him to his destination. He immediately called the showroom. The mechanic apologized and rushed over there. And when he opened the bonnet, he realized that there was no engine. So he said that, sorry, sir, the engine was yet to be fitted in this truck. And the owner, purchaser, was furiously angry with him, saying that how can the truck run so much without engine? And he replied, sir, Tata ka reputation ही ऐसा है. Reputation पे इतना तो truck चल ही देगा. This is a lighter wing story, but it shows the power of reputation. Today, whenever Tata wants money, it's available to them. Never in the history their issue has failed on capital market. And this reputation has been built over the years. There is a book called Beyond the Blue Mountains on the life of J.R.D. Tata. I'll recommend every entrepreneur to read it. It shows what requires to build businesses which lasts beyond centuries. I just want to end about reputation with this anecdote from Tata's. Unlike the previous one, it is the real one. In the aftermath of Second World War beginning, Tata Steel at Jamshedpur was going through a tough time. They didn't have money to pay for salaries and wages of staff. And Jamshedpur sent a cable to Mumbai, then called Bombay, that we don't have money to pay for salaries of staff. Tata family pledged their women jewelry. They pledged their personal resources, took the loan, remitted money to Jamshedpur, and ensured that salaries were paid on time. This was probably the first example in India as well as the world where private property of promoter was pledged, including the family heirloom and jewelry of women, to ensure that public company survives. That kind of sacrifice builds reputation, and that reputation can be encased at any point of time in the future. So always focus on building reputation. That's very, very critical for an entrepreneur. Number two, when I met Uday Kotak, our chairman and a great entrepreneur, he laid down his expectation in following format. And I would like to share with you that this is how you should be conducting business. He said in business or in life, there are four quotients: Ram quotient, Krishna quotient, Duryodhan quotient, and Ravan quotient. In Ram quotient, objective as well as the means to achieve those objectives are very, very noble. Ram fought a dharma yudh with Ravan. There was no shortcut. The means and the objectives both were noble. In Krishna quotient, objective is always noble, but means to achieve those objectives could sometimes be compromised. Winning Mahabharat war was critical, and hence not telling Pandavas that Karna was their elder brother was acceptable. Duryodhan quotient is where objectives are bad, but the means to achieve those objectives is noble. He will focus far more on process than the end result of the process. So when he was fighting for his life in the Gada Yudh at the end of Mahabharat war, he didn't hit below the belt to Bhim, even though Bhim killed him by hitting below the belt. And finally, the Ravan quotient comes where objective as well as means both are bad. Now, if you want to be a successful entrepreneur, try to remain in Ram quotient where your objective as well as the process both are noble, both are dharmic. Because this is Kali Yuga, sometimes you'll have to go into the Krishna quotient where objective will be noble, but means to achieve that objectives could result into some shortcut. Never go into Duryodhan or Ravan portion, no matter what temptation. Means as well as objectives, both should not be bad. In public market, we have seen entrepreneurs having Ravan and Duryodhan portion qualities, traits, success for a while, but eventually they fail. Whereas entrepreneurs belonging to Ram and Krishna quotient over a period of time continues to succeed and build businesses which last for a longer period of time. Now, from reputation and from the nobility of means and process, let me come to third lesson. When I was starting my career, multinational companies were kind of, the best opportunity to invest in market. They had steady businesses, good governances, and they continue to deliver return year after year. Scripts like Hindustan Unilever, Colgate, Hindustan Cocoa Products, then known as Cadbury India Limited, Nestle, Procter and Gamble, they were all reputed companies giving tremendous return to shareholders, and MNC companies were generally valued at a higher price than Indian companies. What was true in rest of the sectors was also true in pharma companies. Companies like Glaxo, Pfizer, Hexagon, Russell were trading at a significant premium to Indian companies. Today, over just last 3 decades, games have totally changed. Indian companies have created far more value than global multinational pharma companies in India. How did that happen? Well, Indian pharma companies grabbed the opportunity of generic pharma. Most foreign multinational pharma companies kept that opportunity in their offshore parent rather than local company. Not only they missed value creation opportunity in India, but they also ended up missing the generic bus, as their parent company's cost structure was not good enough to meet demand of the generic world. Indian companies like Sun, Cipla, Reddy's, Lupin grabbed the opportunity of generic pharma and pursued the path of growth, leaving multinational pharma companies far behind. So in the business, you have to grab the opportunity. Growth is the answer for every problem. Growth generally helps you ride through the wave and create great opportunity, as Indian pharma companies have shown to the multinational pharma companies. This resulted into derating of MNC pharma companies and re-rating of Indian pharma companies. Now, let me come to India's one of the biggest industrial group and the largest market cap company, Reliance Industries Limited. Their founder, Dhirubhai Ambani, is known as the father of retail equity cult in India. Before Reliance Industries' debut in Indian capital market, public issues were somber affair, size was limited, and generally you had to go to banking system to raise capital. Obviously, banks were willing to back established business houses, and capital constraint was one of the main reasons why entrepreneurship could not flourish. Dhirubhai Ambani changed the culture. He started raising capital from market. His annual general meetings of shareholders were conducted in stadiums because they had such a large family. Reliance Industries probably showed the way to raise capital. If there is one learning from them, is that you should raise capital when it is available. And finally, you will figure out how to deploy that capital. It's important to figure out how to deploy capital, but it is also equally important to raise money when it is available. Many a times when you need money, it may not be available. So best thing is to raise capital when it is available. Even today, if you look at Reliance's balance sheet, it's probably sitting on more cash than many corporates put together. Their cash holding will be higher then many a times Government of India surplus or state government surplus. They have followed this doctrine of raising capital when it is available and then finding out how to deploy it efficiently. This has worked very well for Reliance and is one of the reasons for success. So my request to entrepreneurs will be to raise capital when it is available, be always liquid, be always having sufficient cash to meet any eventualities like COVID-19. Now let me come to HDFC Group. It's one of the biggest wealth creators of India. Their valuation generally trades at double the average valuation of sector. HDFC, HDFC Standard Life, HDFC AMC, HDFC Bank, they have always enjoyed platinum valuation. Why did that happen? How did that happen? And there are many reasons for it. But I think one common thread across HDFC Group is client first. They have always focused on client servicing. In the days when for housing loan, people used to stand in a queue, HDFC focused on client servicing. I used to work in Raman House, where HDFC's office was situated. And even in the early 90s, you could see a focus on servicing customer. They were always treating their customer like a king. And that client first policy, that servicing of customer beyond their expectation, even when customer was willing to stand in a queue, made all the difference for the DNA of HDFC Group. Whether it was bank, insurance companies, mutual funds, general insurance, they all carried the same DNA of putting customer first. And no wonder they have created one of the largest market cap in India. Customer first, client first, focusing on servicing of customer are ingredient of any business, but it also helps you get better valuation in the market. Let me now come to a South-based NBFC, Sundaram Finance Limited. It came out with an IPO when I had not even begun my career in capital market. It was probably more than 4 decades back. As you all know, in NBFC, capital is critical, and most successful banks, NBFCs, have kept on raising capital on a repeated basis. Sundaram Finance is an exception. After their listing 3 or 4 decades back, they never came to capital market. They never raised capital. Their business motto was totally different from Reliance, which focused on raising capital when it's available, to never raising capital. Now, are they contradictory things? Answer is no. Reliance raised capital because it was seeking growth opportunity. Sundaram Finance managed growth through prudence, through the capital which was available to them. They didn't pursue the path of trailblazing growth because they were in financial services business, where prudent was key. By their prudence, they consistently grew over a period of time. A company like Bajaj Finance might would have outgrown Sundaram Finance, but Sundaram Finance is the tortoise in the race between tortoise and hare. Eventually, it will win. This whole ability to manage business prudently, to manage business within the risk tolerance limit, within the capital which is available to you, is making Sundaram Finance unique. And in capital market, there is space for a tortoise like Sundaram Finance and a hare like Bajaj Finance. So you have to choose what is appropriate to you rather than copy someone else's business model. Now, let me come to another important aspect, capital allocation. There is a very, very successful cement company just like Sundaram Finance. Shree Cement came out with IPO many decades back. They had probably raised money for 500,000 ton cement capacity. In a commodity business like cement, Shree has delivered return comparable to best in the class FMCG or banking business. They have multiplied their capacity several times over the last many decades without raising external capital. Unlike Sundaram, they visited capital market just once very recently as they had to fund expansion. But otherwise, before that capital raise, after a gap of almost 3 decades, they were continuously growing from internal resources. Their capital allocation policy was one of the best. They extracted maximum buck for the capital which they deployed. And even in a commodity business like cement, they created tremendous wealth for investors. In any business, capital allocation is critical. But in public market, if I have to divide one trait between success and failure, it is about capital allocation. Someone who was not good in allocating capital is eventually punished by the market, and someone who is good in allocating capital is eventually rewarded by the market. Now, let me come to another trait of a successful listed company, and that's Infosys. For years and decades, Infosys was the darling of capital market. Their results generally used to start the result season on a quarterly basis. If you look at Infosys, they have done many wonderful things. But one reason why they were so successful in capital market was always about under-promising and over-delivering. They were able to guide investors' expectation through their quarterly and yearly revenue and profit guidance. They were willing to give the range, and then they were always able to deliver better than expectation. The success in listed markets is under promise and over deliver. A company promising 12% growth in profit and delivering 11.98% will get punished, but a company promising 12% growth and delivering 12.02% will get rewarded. It's not 0.2% which matters. It's always about, are you delivering more than what you're promising? And Infosys mastered the art of under promise and over delivery. And that's one of the reasons, apart from many other qualities, Infosys remained darling of the capital market for decades and decades. I've talked about many success stories of capital markets, but capital market is filled with failures as well. If we can learn from Tata's reputation, if we can learn from dharmic quotient of Ram and Krishna, if we can grab the opportunity like Indian pharma companies by creating scalable growth, if we can focus on raising capital when it is available like Reliance Industries, if we can put client first and servicing client like HDFC Group, if we can become prudent like Sundaram Finance in our business model, if we allocate capital like Shree Cement, and if we under promise and over deliver like Infosys, there's no reason why listed market will not appreciate startup, will not appreciate such kind of companies. And generally companies exhibiting one or more of such trait will be darling of capital market. Now let me talk about failure. How did company fail? How did company waste away their pedigree, their resources? Obviously, in success story, it's easier to name the companies. In failures, it will be difficult to name, but you will be able to understand what I'm talking about. There was one very large textile company in Western India. They were part of Sensex. They were the bluest of blue chip companies in those days. Their industrial group was also considered one of the largest industrial group of India. They were in top 10 industrial groups at the time of independence and thereafter for few years. This company, instead of making money, focused on doing tax planning. It was probably the need of an hour in those days, as income tax rates were very high. But this company, this group kept on creating trust so that they can save on paying taxes. Somewhere, instead of making money, they were focused on saving taxes. And eventually, apart from many other things, that resulted into downfall of this industrial group. Today, they are barely an image of the past. From being top 10 industrial groups of this country, they are nowhere to be seen. Please focus on making money, rather than saving taxes. Taxes are paid only on the profits you make. You should do legitimate tax planning, but you should not focus all your energy on saving taxes through legitimate and illegitimate tax planning rather than running business. The second thing which has hurt Indian promoters, Indian businesses, is what I will call Dhritarashtra mentality. You all very well know in Mahabharata how Dhritarashtra's blind love for his son Duryodhan resulted into eventual death and destruction. Dhritarashtra was so blind with his love for his son that he didn't look at the meritocracy of Pandavas. The same thing is happening even today. Many promoters prefer to do succession planning within the family, despite the fact that some daughters are not as capable of running the business. They give family more priority over the professionalism, over the meritocracy. And generally, it results into a disaster. Many promoters, like Sunil Gavaskar, doesn't know when to retire. Sunil Gavaskar, when he retired, I think, after scoring a century in his one-day international against New Zealand. And someone asked him that, why are you retiring now? You are in such a peak of a form. And he replied, I should retire when everyone is asking, why am I retiring? Rather than, when am I retiring? Many promoters became victim of their success. They believe they are irreplaceable and they continue to work beyond their expiry date. Both these things don't work good for the businesses. Businesses should be run on meritocracy rather than your love for your, kids, or continuing to run the business beyond expiry date. Apart from this focus on saving taxes or blind love for your kids or staying beyond expiry date, one more reason why companies fail is related to leverage. Leverage is a double-edged sword. It can cut on both sides. Many a times leverages make business successful, and many a times leverages fail business by a big margin. There was a legendary fund manager called Bill Miller. For years, he was able to deliver outperformance over benchmark index. I think in 14 out of 15 years before 2008, he had delivered outperformance over benchmark index. When 2008 subprime came and hit him, he lost all his performance since inception. 14 out of 15 years before 2008, he was outperforming index. And in 2008, his performance went down so badly that since inception, he started underperforming the index. He gave a very beautiful note on where he went wrong. His investments was mainly in financial services. Most financial services were leveraged handsomely. And he said, when I was looking at the return on equity generated by this financial services company, I gave them valuation assuming that these businesses are generating money. In reality, it was not the business. It was the leverage which was generating return. And I ignored the risk of leverage and I paid a heavy price. You end up losing your 15 years performance in 1 year when leverage works against you. What is true for investor is also true for business. The leverage in a business can kill a company. Many companies have died because they didn't raise appropriate capital structure. There was one old industrial house who moved into power business. They were taking capital from other businesses to put into power business. When that was not sufficient, they pledged their holdings in listed companies to raise loans to fund into power business. They essentially funded the entire power business on debt. By definition, power businesses are leveraged several times. And unfortunately, in this case, even the net worth of the power business was funded out of leverage on promoters' holding. There were opportunities for them to raise equity capital in public market, but greed overtook them and they failed to raise capital at the right time. Eventually, when they needed money, capital wasn't available. And finally, debt servicing took the toll. Today, that industrial group is virtually finished. Neither they are in their listed companies, nor they are in their power companies, as lenders took away everything. This is classical example of how leverage kills. Leverage works both ways. On the way up, it will support you tremendously. On the way down, it will kill you instantly. Finally, one last point on failure is about knowing your limit. There was one blue chip petrochemical company in the 60s and 70s and 80s. It was established by joint ventureship with a multinational company. They were pioneer in their field in India. Now, at some point of time, the multinational company wanted to take over the business, and Indian promoters stunned them by buying them out. This was probably one of the very rare instances where Indian promoter bought out multinational partner. Now, that transaction was welcomed by everyone, and people said, this is the coming of Indian entrepreneurship. We are no longer going to be kind of overwhelmed by multinational companies. We will do business on equal terms. Well, that bravado wasn't good enough, and eventually that company had to be liquidated. One must know this Lakshman Rekha, which one should not cross. Businesses run on logic, on competency, on opportunities, but one should not chew, one should not bite more than one can chew. These are some of the reasons why listed companies fail: over leverage, no succession planning, meritocracy not given as much importance, focus on tax planning rather than earning, and biting more than what you can chew. If you avoid those mistakes, undoubtedly listed markets will be welcoming. Listed markets will be able to give you an exit opportunity for your private equity investors. These are the stories which I have learned over my 3 decades in capital market. I hope the messages stay with you, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Nilesh. I think these were such interesting stories, especially I think you also just gave some examples from our culture or what I think every person would relate to. And also we went across the field in terms of the failures and the wins and different type of factors that were affecting those stories. So I think that has been very interesting. So we already have a few questions. I think the first one we'll take up is, what is the right time for a startup to go public? So Arihant has asked if as per timeline that 3 years, 5 years, or 7 years. Is there some? Can you call something as the right time to go public for a startup?
So there are 2 kinds of timings which are necessary. One, when capital is available, that's the best time to go to the market. Let's assume in 2003 you wanted to raise capital. It would have been a very tough time. And even a company like Maruti Suzuki, when it came to raise capital with their business, they gave their shares at way below their fair value, because it was difficult to raise capital in that time frame. On the other hand, in 2008, when markets were booming, if you had come to raise money, even an IPO like Reliance Power was able to do record mobilization. So one thing is, from the market point of view, raise money in a bull market rather than in a bear market. The second thing is from your requirement point of view. As I mentioned earlier, you have to raise capital when it is available. So one aspect is your need and the market behavior, market psychology, market bullishness. The second thing is more important and fundamental point of view. When you raise capital, your meter starts ticking. You have to deploy that capital in the business for growth. As a startup, you are going to get rewarded either for growth or for innovation. You are not going to get rewarded for low growth or low innovation. So whenever you raise capital, you will have to demonstrate growth or innovation to investors. Now put those two things together. When there is growth opportunity, when market is bullish, and when you will be able to deploy that capital, that combination will be the perfect time to launch your IPO.
Right. I think you perfectly explained it in terms of, all the stars that have to align if you want to raise funds from the market. So I think this kind of is a follow-up question to this. What milestone should the founders achieve before thinking about an IPO specifically? I would add to this, Nilesh, I think you've already addressed a part of this, but would you want to add a bit more on the governance or the regulatory issues on this?
Sure. So one, there are lots of requirements from regulatory side. SEBI, when you file for IPO, will tick the boxes. Now, an investment banker is the right person to advise you on that. I am more on the investor side. So let me give you what you will require from an investor point of view. If you come to meet me, how will I evaluate you? Obviously, the first tick box is that you have complied with all the SEBI regulations. Otherwise, you won't be able to come out with IPO. But apart from that, you'll have to tick many boxes. One, the first and the most important is your business model. What is your business model? How is the path to profitability? How are you going to generate return on the capital? Now, please remember that path to profitability could be long. Path to profitability could be driven by growth, which itself will be contingent on many uncertainties. But there should be a business model which is working. There should be certain uniqueness about your business model and your conviction about the same. When Infosys came out with IPO, that IPO didn't do well. It actually failed. It was devolved on underwriters. Why did it happen? It happened not because Infosys business model was wrong, but people were unable to understand Infosys business model. Those were the days when if you want to make a phone call from Mumbai to Delhi, you had to book a lightning call for an urgent talk. You had to book PP call. You had to shout so much that your voice itself will go to Delhi directly rather than via the phone. In those days, if you wanted to go abroad, you had to take dollars in Hawala market because the official limit which was given to you will not help you survive. In that kind of environment where people had not seen computers, Infosys came and said that we are going to service offshore customers. It would have required hell of a lot of conviction for people to believe that. And that's why Infosys IPO failed on listing. It devolved on the underwriters because people were not convinced. But those people who were convinced, and very recently we read how Mr. Narayan Murthy thanked Vallabh Bhansali and Nimish Shah of Enam, that they backed us with their hilt. So you have to convince people on the business model, if not the entire market, certain segment of investors who will be able to back you. The second thing, from growth comes governance. Your governance structure should be robust. Your auditor should be someone whose numbers people will rely upon. There are many companies which come out with some shady auditors. Well, investors are able to see through that. So always get your accounts audited by reputed auditors. Your board of directors should represent diversity as well as professionalism. There are many companies where the board of directors is all 70 plus. Now that's not going to inspire confidence. There are many companies where board of directors are rubber stamped to the promoter. That's not going to inspire confidence. You want to invest in a company where board is capable of ensuring that governance standards are followed and promoters are accountable to the board. The third thing will then come towards your capital structure. Are you raising capital because it's available, or are you going to deploy that capital in a prudent manner? Again, you could be funding losses, but it should result into some innovation or some growth and some path to profitability over a period of time. All these things make a difference to the investors. And finally, the most important thing which any investor wants is transparency. There's no better disinfectant than sunshine. Transparency in everything is extremely critical. There are many companies where CFO keeps on changing on a regular basis. Now that's a first red signal. If CFO himself is not believing in the company, why should investor believe in it? There are many companies where promoters kept on selling their stake. Now, if promoter does not believe in his company or her company, why will investor believe? So there will be need for transparency. If you put a package which has growth, which has governance, and which has transparency, I think that is far more important to get listed into the capital market and create value on a sustainable basis.
Right. No, great, Nilesh. I think this was interesting that, even I was not aware that, Infosys IPO was not considered as a success at that time. One would not be able to, digest that if this didn't come with, from you. So another question we have is, are there any, so we have talked about the listing part. So are there any special provisions or benefits or some sort of a policy that helps the startups in a positive manner when they get listed on the stock exchanges?
Undoubtedly, today, unlisted equities carry far higher taxation than listed equity. So as an entrepreneur, it makes sense for you to get your company listed and then exit rather than exit before. This is legitimate tax planning. Number two, while in the startup world, there are many exits happening, still the liquidity is far poor compared to listed market. Your employees, if they want to exercise their ESOPs in a public market, they'll have a far bigger liquidity compared to private market. You will be able to retain employees on a longer term because they are getting liquid ESOPs rather than illiquid ESOPs. The third thing is brand and recognition. Now today, many people know Amazon, Flipkart, Byju's, and so on and so forth. But if they were listed companies, will the recognition be even more? Answer is yes. The success of HDFC, Infosys, Sun Pharma, ICICI Bank, Kotak Bank is also attributable to the fact that their brand became more recognizable as they were listed in India, as investors experienced them as a shareholder. Infosys was able to get many foreign contracts because of their stellar track record in Indian capital market. When anyone wanted to look at credentials of Infosys, they just looked at the compounded growth rate, their praise in the capital market for their governance, and so on and so forth. Their balance sheets were like a Bhagavad Gita to read. There was so much information given which no one else was giving at that point of time. All those things put together created brand and reputation. So when you transit from a startup to a listed company, you get lower taxation, you get liquidity, and you get far higher brand recognition than what you will get as an unlisted company. These are the benefits of getting listed.
Right. And I would just, add to this saying that a lot of times early stage founders might think that, IPO is that goalpost, right? I think what you're saying is, if you are into this for a long haul, if you want to, kind of build an empire, this probably would be a big milestone. And beyond this itself, you have bigger things to achieve, right? Great, Nilesh. I think that was...
Shivam, there is a saying, सितारों से आगे जहां और भी है. So in market, IPO से आगे और भी जहां है.
So true. So I think this part should go viral now. So we'll go on to the next one. And Nilesh, I'll request you to keep the answers short because we have too many questions but less time.
Okay.
So one is how important a corporate or transaction banking's role is to execute capital transactions.
Very, very important. You have to select right investment banker. If you go with a bad investment banker, he may give you instant success, but eventually it will come to bite you. But if you go with a good investment banker, even if it means 10% less valuation, it will create a better experience, and over a period of time that will reward you. So a person is known by the company he keeps, and for a startup to get into listed segment, company of investment bankers is extremely important.
Right. We have another one. So what they've mentioned is that, while building a company, what is more important? I think one point is kind of covered, that, what is more important, IPO as the goalpost, or thinking for building a great company like Tata. I would say, I would add to this, and Nilesh, ask you. So I think the latest buzz in the town was Zomato IPO, right? And from based on your experience, what are your thoughts in terms of what can be expected now from other founders who are looking at IPO as the next step, and also a lot of early stage founders who can now change their thinking from as we said, thinking of IPO as a goalpost and or to a milestone, right? So what are your expectations from the ecosystem itself now?
So when you are taking money from private equity players, they also come with their agenda. Many a times there is a complete alignment between private equity's goals and promoters' goals, but sometimes there are differences. The public money is far less invasive. They just come with one agenda of making money. They don't interfere with you in terms of how to make money. They just trust an entrepreneur and give him the leeway. Private equity players do give leeway, their objectives are same, but they also kind of show the path. Now, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So public market gives you leeway in terms, far more leeway compared to private market. This is one big advantage of public market.
Sure. So Nilesh, I think we have a few questions which are not directly related to the topic, but I think if you can answer these in short, I think these are from probably retail investors, I guess. So some of them have asked regarding, how as a mutual fund, how stocks are picked. And I would add to this question and asking that, since now we'll be seeing a lot of IPOs of the startups, right? What would be your overall view, in a sense that, off the bat, are startups looking as a good long-term investment when they join the public market now, or the industry or the veterans would be waiting for some time to see how they hold on?
So there are two contradictory trends prevailing in market today. Big is becoming bigger. We have seen that consolidation happening in telecom sector, where out of 9 players, now 2.5 players remain. We have seen that happening in airline, where out of 5-6 players, now 2.5 players remain. So this is one trend. On the other side, we are also seeing the trend where disruptor is eating dinosaur alive. We have seen how new age, the private banks came and disrupted public sector banks. How NBFCs came and disrupted public sector banks. How Zerodha came and disrupted existing broking companies. Now, both these trends are contradictory. One side, big is becoming bigger. Other side, David is slaying Goliath. But both of this can exist. And as an investor, we'll be willing to back both this trend. One where big is becoming bigger, consolidation is happening, and one where growth is getting generated through innovation, through disruption. And eventually that growth and disruption will create a bigger company. So as an investor, we'll be looking to invest in those startups which are David fighting Goliath, but has a better chance of winning.
Right. I think that's what makes sense for a retail investor as well. You can't be emotional about stocks, I guess, and investing when you're putting in your own money. So moving on from this one, there's a question regarding what's the maximum amount we can raise from a VC as a startup, and what would be the highest bar if we are going for IPO or maybe the stock market, right? I think what they want to understand is what are the opportunities or the maximum limits of raising capital through VC or an IPO.
So one thing you have to understand is that if you end up raising too much capital too soon, you will also get diluted as a promoter. Look at Infosys versus Wipro. Now, it's an unfair comparison because Mr. Azim Premji, his father Hazim Premji was an industrialist. He was on the board of State Bank of India. He had set up a fairly large industrial unit. On the other hand, Infosys founders were first generation entrepreneurs. Most of them were professionals working in Patni computers, and then came out to start their venture. But keeping those dissimilarities, today Mr. Azim Premji is far more wealthy than Infosys founders because he retained 75% ownership in Wipro for a long period of time. Mr. Narayan Murthy and other co-founders kept on diluting as they needed capital. Now, again, this is a very unfair comparison, but I just wanted to make a point. If you dilute too soon, you end up cutting yourself short. So you have to raise that much capital, which is essential plus little more to cover contingencies like COVID, and essential to run the business so that you don't get diluted soon.
Right. I think Nilesh, that's perfectly summarized. It's not important about knowing what's the maximum that you can raise, but a founder should be aware of how much they can afford to dilute their equity, and plus what's the amount of capital they actually need to run the business or to build the business. So we'll take maybe last one or two questions. So next one is regarding how founders go through the process or the journey of going from the seed to angel or the seed funding, and then all the series of fundings that they get, and then the IPO. So the question is that are the asset management companies also looking at this whole journey before the IPO as well? Like, is there any scope in future in terms of asset management companies also entering that market or that leg of the market?
So in some sense, we are the Chiteshwar Pujaras of the world who are fit for playing test match. But now one day and T20 are becoming rage, and we are modifying our techniques to play in T20 and one day. We are not natural over there, but we realize that is the future and we have to evolve. Now transition will happen first from test match to one day rather than T20 directly, and eventually hopefully into T20 if we succeed. So many asset management companies have already launched pre-IPO fund that's in AIF format rather than mutual fund, but it is still managed by the asset management companies. This is giving you probably late round funding just ahead of the IPO. And I'm sure the natural transition based on that success will be towards seed and venture capital. So you will see today asset management companies providing post-IPO and pre-IPO funding and transiting slowly into seed capital and early round funding.
Right, Nilesh. I think that was interesting to know. Even I was not aware, there is this space now that you're exploring. I think that would be very interesting for founders. So before we close the session, there's one comment from Indradeep. He wants to let us know that, session was very useful for him, and inputs from a veteran like Nilesh are very useful. So thanks, Indradeep, for that comment. I think that's what the plan was. So Nilesh, last question. And this would be on policy. I'm not sure how much you can comment on it, but what would be one or two policy points or features that you think should be addressed by the regulators, by the governments, in terms of making it easier for startups to raise funds in the public markets? It can be in the existing system, or maybe some new structures can be built.
So my limited point, Shivam, over there is that today we are living in a world where regulator is open for suggestion. In my interaction with regulator, Every time I have faced a problem, I have gone to them with my problem and they have given me solution which is fair. So I'll give you an example. We were running a very large multi-cap fund. And then regulator came out with an allocation in multi-cap that 50%, you should put minimum 25% in large, mid and small cap and balance 25% is discretionary. Now, I was running a 30,000 crore fund, which was 75% large cap and 25% small and mid cap. Going into that kind of allocation would have resulted into significant impact cost and the way we were managing money. We went to regulator with our problem. In no time, they were happy to create flexi cap category so that we don't create impact cost on our portfolio. Any regulation which you find cumbersome, which you find difficult to comply, you have to raise it with the regulator. If you go individually, response will be probably less. But if you go collectively as an association, then obviously regulator will realize that this is a widespread problem and requires a solution. Don't take current regulation as the lamppost. If it's creating disturbance, go to regulator, explain your problem, and 9 out of 10, they'll be more than happy to create a fair solution.
Right, and I would agree with Nilesh on this. I think at NASSCOM, with our policy team, we've been able to move a lot of mountains in past 2 years in terms of startup policies. And I would agree that if you go with the right information, if you go with some solutions also, right, with the regulators, they're happy to listen and make amends and in fact improve a lot of things for the markets, for the startups, for the founders in general. So with this, I think we'll conclude the session, Nilesh. I think this was very insightful. You're a great storyteller, I must say. I think the points that were raised through all the stories and all the I would say the insights that we've learned, just because these were in the storyboard and plus you gave a lot of real life examples. I think we'll remember each one of those. So thank you so much for joining in, and we'll definitely be inviting you for more such sessions. I think this was a wonderful one, and we'll try and figure out if we can probably plan some more sessions with more interesting topics as well, in specifically in the mutual fund area or the BFSI space. And we hope to see you again on more such sessions.
Definitely. Shivam, it was my pleasure. All the very best.
Great. Thanks, Nilesh. And thanks everyone for joining in. We'll keep you posted on more sessions that we plan. Have a good day and thank you so much. Thank you.